civil aviation in the UK. He's the innovation services lead, and Eric will pull up his bio in the chat session so everybody can understand where Frederick has come from. I've benefited from quite a few discussions with Frederick and actually seen some significant changes at the Civil Aviation Authority and in terms of their approach to innovation, especially regarding electric aviation and the regulation surrounding it. So without taking too much, I'm hoping that Frederick is available. Frederick, I can see you there. Foresight Aerospace calling Frederick. Ah.
Hi, Daryl, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I need to share my screen. I'm not
yes,
sure.
Please.
Let me see. Share screen. Foresight Aerospace. There we go. So
brilliant.
a full screen. Okay. All right. So let me start from the start. So first of all, Eric, Carol, thank you very much for the invitation to speak at the conference. It's really a great pleasure to be joining all these really fascinating discussions on electric aviation and perhaps the future of air mobility. What I wanted to share today with you guys is some of our thinking on the regulatory challenges that are associated with future air mobility. And actually, I'm really as well pleased to announce that we will be launching 2 initiatives which are here to address those regulatory challenges, and we hope that those initiatives will be bringing together the CAA and the industry. I'll explain all of that in more details. First of all, just to explain who we are, not the CAA, but more the innovation team within the CAA. We launched, the CAA launched the innovation team and the innovation hub in April last year. Our purpose is really to create an environment where innovation can be explored and can flourish, but in line with our core principles. And our core principles are essentially safety, security, and consumer protection, in very short. When it comes to our innovation hub, we've developed 3 services. And first, we developed the gateway. So the gateway is there to make it easier for innovators to access the CA expertise, talking to the right person, accessing guidance on regulation, and also our viewpoint on innovation. And we do that providing a focal point of contact and information, one single point and point of entry into the CA. Our regulatory lab is there to accelerate the development of new policies and regulation. And we do that by anticipating the regulatory challenges in areas of innovation and trying to define the requirements that are needed for new policies and regulation to address those regulatory challenges. Finally, we have our regulatory sandbox, and our sandbox is here to maximize regulatory readiness for the trial of innovative concepts. We know that many industry players want to move from a proof of concept to a trial in some sort of live operation. So we want to test with them their solution in safe environments and learn how they address our regulatory challenges, what is safe and unsafe, so we can help them to get some approval for conducting their trials. That's us in very short. Before I go into more into what we do in the space of future air mobility, I'll just set the scene. And there's quite a lot of progress made internationally with regulators to support electric aviation. So EASA is working on its special conditions, which were published last summer. It's very much focusing on eVTOL. They are currently progressing their work on defining the means of compliance. That involves the work from EuroK, who are working on industry standards. So here we got the industry involved. We got also some regulators involved, and all of these will be supporting the development of the necessary means of compliance. In the US, The FAA is doing a number of experimental flights. They are using their special rotorcraft class aircraft as a means to develop the right regulatory framework. So there are things happening. We want to play our role. We want to support those initiatives. We want to complement them where there is a need to complement them. And essentially what the Innovation Hub is doing is we're exploring a range of themes that we believe will contribute to the future air mobility industry. So we have a general theme on future air mobility, where we're looking at aircraft, looking at infrastructures and all the different components, that system of systems that will enable future air mobility. We've been looking for quite some time now at beyond visual line of sight operation in segregated airspace, which is really essential when you start to have autonomous systems. We are looking closely at traffic management as well, and airspace integration through UTM, for instance. We're very interested in electronic conspicuity. We know it will play a role in enabling future air mobility. And we're increasingly looking into autonomous operations, which is something which will inevitably be part of any future air mobility operations. So these are the themes that we are investigating. We know that regulations for future air mobility and the approval mechanisms will have to adapt. And as I said earlier, the EASA, the FAA are all working on this. We know that gaining regulatory approval for future air mobility is really new territory. So what we have done recently is that we've started to put together an initial list of regulatory questions. We call them challenges sometimes. Those questions we need to explore, and which will drive the change in regulation and approval mechanisms. And they come through a number of themes there, which I will go one by one through them. So aircraft, for instance, there's a number of regulatory questions around the requirements for the design, the maintenance, and the repair of aircrafts. How do these requirements will apply to novel propulsion systems using electric, hybrid, or hydrogen propulsions? What are the failure modes, redundancies, contingency procedures? All these questions will have to be answered to shape future regulatory frameworks. When it comes to ground infrastructures, we need to understand what the infrastructure requirements should be to enable safe ground operations. How should aircraft be refueled, recharged? What are the implications on the safety of both ground and air operation? And what are the implications of operating in an urban environment? That most certainly will bring new challenges or new context to those policies. In terms of airspace and air traffic management, again, what are the requirements to enable safe integration with other airspace users? Are the current navigation and positioning methodologies sufficiently resilient and robust, especially for use in urban environment? What are the operating procedures with regard to avoiding collisions, and not only in air, but also in ground, especially in urban environment? And how should these procedures be adapted for urban environment? That's for airspace and air traffic management. In terms of aviation security, that's one aspect which really needs as well to be further researched. What should be the requirements for screening passengers, ground staff, crew, and goods as well, to ensure that all operations secure ground operations? All these things are well defined for the traditional aviation. How does this transpose to new modes of operation? What should be the requirements in terms of boarding procedures, screening of baggage, aircraft search requirements, aircraft cockpit security, security training and recruitment? All of these things will have to be considered. And we'd also like to point at cybersecurity, because that's quite something becoming increasingly important. What are the cybersecurity requirements for ensuring that all critical network and information system maintain confidentiality, integrity, and availability? That's the big topic of aviation security. In terms of licenses, we'd like to understand what should the licensing requirements be related to aircraft, operators, ground infrastructures, airspace traffic management, and as well controllers. In terms of training, pretty much the same. What should be the requirements for training pilots, cabin crew, air traffic controllers, engineers, ground site staff, security personnel, etc. There's quite a long list there. Then moving on to consumers, how will consumers remain protected? And I'm thinking here of delays, cancellation, baggage problem, complaints from passengers requiring special assistance. All of these things will have to be considered in future policies and regulation. In terms of environment, what is the overall environmental impact of future air mobility operation? What are the noise implications, visual blight as well, are aspects that we will have an interest in and will want to understand what needs to be managed from our perspective. And finally, societal impact, which is something that the industry recognizes as quite an important part of the journey. Which community on the ground, who will be affected directly or indirectly by future air mobility operation? And I'm thinking here, for instance, of urban air mobility. How can the public perception of those operations be tested? What information we should make available to the public? Or perhaps how should we include them into the testing of future air mobility concepts? So all of that are quite a lot of questions that we would like to answer, explore together with the industry. And that's why we've launched, and we are launching very shortly, probably today, if we get all our websites ready, or in the coming days, 2 initiatives that will aim to bring together the industry and the CA. The first one is the regulatory sandbox. The regulatory sandbox is there to explore those regulatory questions through testing. We are inviting the industry to come to us and proposing solutions that addresses our regulatory questions. We want to test them in safe environment to see what works, what does not work. Do we have the right question, and how does the solution addresses our questions? That's the whole purpose of the regulatory sandbox. And what we hope through those regulatory sandbox work is to enable very rapidly the trial of future air mobility operation. The second initiative is our call for insight. The call for insight is there we're inviting all stakeholders in the industry to provide insight on risk management in future air mobility. We have developed an initial set of risk model, and we've taken a specific scenario around an eVTOL aircraft, and we follow the whole journey from taking off and landing to ground operation through everything. And we've highlighted a number of risks. They all lead to those questions which I have shared with you. Again, this is our starter for 10. We trust that the industry has far more insight on that topic, and we would really welcome to have that dialogue with the industry. So all these 2 initiatives will be available on our website. There will be far more information available. You can get all the information on www.ca.co.uk/innovation. Perhaps to conclude my talk, I would say that gaining regulatory approval for future air mobility, again, as I said earlier, it's new territory. Aviation regulations and approval mechanisms needs to adapt. We do agree with that. We have identified an initial set of regulatory challenges, and we're really pleased to announce those 2 initiatives and hope that we can work more closely with the industry to answer those questions and help regulations to move at the pace that the industry needs. Really, our aim is to create an environment where innovation can be explored and as I said, can flourish, but all of that in line with our core principle around security, safety, and consumer protection. Thank you very much.
Wow. So I guess we've heard it here. So the CAA are putting out the call for participation in the regulatory sandbox and a call for insight on that. So Frederick, thank you very much. We've had some questions coming through specifically on those subjects, and what we'll do is ask you, Frederick, if you can address Roger either in the chat room or directly at another time. But I am a bit aware of the time getting away from us. But I just wanted to ask, how quickly are you looking for industry to respond? Is there any deadlines for responding, or is this an open invitation to interact with the CAA?
So the call for insight, Daryl, has a 10 weeks open period. So we'd like to receive some input within 10 weeks.
Okay.
Again, any inputs coming after that will be as well welcome. It's not a hard deadline by any means. The sandbox, we as well gave an initial period of 10 weeks, but there is no closing date. So any application that we receive from 10 weeks from now, we will start reviewing the first application, and anything we get beyond that, we will welcome any of those applications.
Okay. I'm going to ask you one question from the Q&A, and it's from David Robert. Will the UK leaving EASA provide more potential for future air mobility innovations and at a faster pace? I think that's really relevant to everything that's happening in the UK right now, and with what you're doing within the CAA.
No, absolutely. So to answer David's question, really, so we are in negotiation, obviously, with the EU at the moment. The CAA's priority is to establish its design and certification capability as a state of design. That's where we want to be. We are talking to EASA. We are trying to understand what could be the new relationship that we will have with the EASA. I will not give any further information at that stage, but again, there will be more information available in the coming month. And I, by no doubt, I appreciate we'll have an impact on how the industry is moving on, but this is as much clarity as we can give at the moment.
Okay, I am going to indulge some of these last questions that have just popped up. So Tim Morrison has asked, how long did the regulatory process take to run through for the recent use of the drones across the Solent for medical supplies to the Isle of Wight? And is that representative of the speed at which the CAA is going to be operating in the future?
Well, so that current operation comes within the context of the government response to COVID-19. Really, at the moment, we are prioritizing the assessment of those operational safety case, because there is an urgent need. This is something that we've agreed with the government. So there is a lot of speed at the moment. When we resume to a more normal situation, I think it will be back to probably a more normal way of working. There is a lot of other application that needs to be assessed. The industry is also moving beyond the response to COVID-19. So I think we'll probably come back to a more normal situation later on. But that has showed as well that example that things can move very quickly.
Yeah, I thought watching that was just absolutely amazing, and I of course got involved with trying to help convert the Excel Center into NHS Nightingale with regards to the change of use, and it was really refreshing to see how quickly the airports and the various different stakeholders responded to getting that through. So just absolutely amazing response from the industry. Right, so we're 3 minutes over time. Frederick, thank you very much. Again, your input is absolutely amazing. There is some other questions about the call for insight, but I'll ask you to pick that up directly. So again, thank you very much, sir.
Very welcome.
Cheers. Right, so up now we have Caden, the CEO of Jaunt Air Mobility, and I've been lucky to see Caden speak a couple of times at some vertical flight conferences in the US, and his colleagues speak at the Berkeley Sustainable Aviation Summit. And I must admit, when I first saw the concept of the vehicle, I was scratching my head a little bit, but the more I hear about it, the more I like it. So I'm going to pass directly over to Caden to take us through it, sir. Oh, you're not quite. Hopefully you're. Oh, just unmute yourself, sir.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you, Daryl, and I want to thank everyone for participating. This is a wonderful event, and hopefully I'll be able to shed some light on what Jaunt Air Mobility is doing. The title is Transforming How We Live, Work, and Play. And some of the things that I've noticed in the presentation is recently I get a lot of COVID questions. I'll try to intersperse that with what I'm presenting today. So I'm going to go through some of the slides that we have here and talk to you a little bit about what Jaunt has been looking to solve as a problem with our partnership with Uber as an Uber Air Taxi developer. Essentially what we're looking at, and most of you probably have seen some of these numbers, is the rising cost of urban air traffic congestion. Urban traffic congestion. The solution, of course, would be urban air. One of the things recently we've been looking at was how has COVID affected the workforce here in the United States. In December of 2019, we've actually saw teleworkers at about 2% on a national average. In April of 2020, due to COVID and what they call shelter in place, over 40% of American workers are working from home. So if you think of the impact that has on the transportation industry, that's 40% less people traveling on our roads. All of a sudden, roads that I know I've traveled on, which sat in congestion for an hour, I can now get through in 15 to 18 minutes. So this is going to change because many companies are saying we're going to stick to a teleworking model, but that doesn't change the impact of air mobility. What it does is it changes how people will travel. People that normally travel weekly from Monday to Friday for their employment or school, when it comes to the weekend, they want to stay home and do things at the house or relax. Whereas if they are home working, they're doing things at the home, they're not getting out much, and on the weekends they're going to get out. So it changes the gridlock. It just shifts the pattern from Monday to Friday to a weekend or extended weekend. Looking at some of the areas that are most impacted by gridlock and congestion, as you can see, in the United States, it's Los Angeles as our #1 city, and Uber is putting a metroplex in Los Angeles, as well as in Dallas in the United States, and Melbourne, Australia, as the 3 large megaplexes that they're looking at. Jaunt is also looking at many of these areas. We've done a lot of analytics in the Miami, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., and the New York City area in learning how to move people and move goods. In the European area, we have been looking at London and Paris, but we've also looked at some of the other areas such as Rome and Stockholm, Vienna, other areas that could utilize a urban air mobility aircraft that would have between an 80 and 150 nautical mile range at almost a 200 knot speed. And then in Asia, we've been focusing on Delhi, Bangalore in India, and been looking at some of the other particular cities that you're not seeing on this chart. So transformative aviation, the ecosystem. Jaunt is not just building an aircraft, we are building a complete ecosystem. The ecosystem consists of everything that it takes to launch this aircraft. This is very important. If we just build an aircraft or a fleet of aircraft and we put it out there in the public, if there's not enough properly trained pilots, MRO, maintenance, repair, overhaul centers, FBOs, fixed-based operators, here in the US, Part 135 operators, if they are not trained and in position, then we're not going to be able to have the high up-tempo of operations that we are looking at with Jaunt. Jaunt is intended to fly 8 hours a day, roughly 2,000 hours a year, quick up-tempo turnarounds. So that means when the aircraft lands, whether it's doing sawtooth charging or it has to clean the cabin, and again, COVID has a big impact there about cleaning the cabin. People are going to be more sensitive for years to come about, bacteria, viruses, and how are we going to clean those cabins very quickly and also affordably. So these are some of the things that we are always looking at right now, and we've brought in many partners that help us, that have the experience in dealing with flight operations, maintenance and repair, quick turnaround, everything from looking at real-time digital maintenance, checking the tire pressure in the vehicles. So these are something that is all part of the aviation ecosystem. Adding to that is also, how do people travel? If they're going to go by ride sharing, there's got to be an ingress egress roadway capability so people can get to the Jaunt ports, the sky ports, whatever they may be able to queue up and go through a security, a brief security, and to be able to get in queue for their passenger takeoff. So again, if we can't get people to and from these port facilities efficiently, then we can't keep the high up tempo of turning these aircraft around. So if we look at what Jaunt is doing, there's Jaunt as an OEM, an aircraft manufacturer, and then there's our partner network, which we call Airborne, and that's part of a mobility as a service capability. And what we're doing is we're looking at this entire framework. There's been a lot of talk about energy management. This becomes important also from the charging perspective and where we stage our aircraft. For example, to have the high charge rates on a sawtooth charging at many of the non-megaplex facilities that we are looking to operate, such as in the Northeast United States, which would be New York City up through Boston, that if we're not at a major airport, and the whole idea is not to be always at a major airport, but to be at a suburban areas where it can be quick ingress, egress for passenger drop off, pickup, and also for our aircraft to get in and out without being in here in the US in what's called Class B airspace, and that's the large airspace around large airports. But to do that kind of charging, it may require putting in energy substations, which are very expensive, because a lot of the FBOs or the platform areas where we plan to operate from will not have sufficient electrical power to continually charge these aircraft. So that also looks to drive the design of the aircraft. For example, do we want to do a battery drop and replacement? Would that be done by robotics? So this way we could trickle charge the batteries over an extended period of time without putting the extra burden of time, infrastructure, and cost of putting in an electrical substation. So these all come hand in hand with the design of the aircraft and the operations of the aircraft. Infrastructure becomes very important, as well as staging the individual passengers. So think about standing in line to pick up a taxi. You might be there 15 minutes. We've also talked to commuters that said, well, wait a second, I get a lot of work done in my 1 hour of travel because I'm on my headset and I'm arranging for my pre-sales calls or my pre-meetings where I have time to do that in the peace and quiet of my vehicle. So we've looked at this, we've talked to potential riders, we've done a lot of analytics, and one of the things that we're also looking at is providing ground-based stations where people can come in and be able to get some work done, maybe in a business center, so they can come in a little bit early, do the things that they have to do, have internet connection, and operate in a manner that doesn't take them away from the way they currently do things, but to compress their timeline, to give them more free time to do their business, looking at the business commuter. So as you can see, there's a lot of individual pieces that get put into the entire mobility as a service framework. Looking at pilots at the top end, where are these pilots going to come from? We have been looking at more experienced pilots initially because our aircraft is a compound aircraft, and our aircraft has full helicopter capability, full helicopter controls. That's the upper main rotor you see. And it also has full fixed wing controls. It flies just like a helicopter. It flies just like an airplane. So it has some unique capabilities about it. One of the most unique features is the fuselage always remains at zero angle of attack. So when you get into this aircraft on the tarmac, we'd like to say if you had a glass of water filled to the brim, you'll never spill it throughout the entire flight envelope. The fuselage remains steady. So some of the things that are going to affect how we live, work, and play are the workforce development. In New York City, a commuter round trip time is 90 minutes, tremendous gridlock. Now, the problem is we may not be able to get directly into downtown Manhattan, and Uber has been working with traditional ICE helicopters and operators because there are waterborne ports that they can land at. But this is something that we are looking at. Where else can we land? In the United States, some of you may remember 50 years ago, there was a helicopter crash on the roof of the Pan Am building. And ever since that time, no aircraft, no helicopter lands on any rooftops in New York City. So, public acceptance becomes very critical on how and where we're going to operate. In the United States, urban air mobility has a tremendous capability to help in the healthcare of individuals. As you can see here, if you divided the United States right down the middle, you can see that to the west, there is a tremendous problem with getting people to and from trauma centers. A 1-hour drive is just unacceptable. So being able to have the ability to have our aircraft stage in a manner where we can provide air ambulance services or emergency relief services. Right now, the death rate is 50% higher in these states, and it's strictly due to the inability of having efficient transportation systems in place. We're seeing this more and more. A lot of the larger universities tend to be on the outskirts or in remote areas. These are very, very large campuses. Driving to some of these campuses are very difficult. So what's happening is we're seeing many of the high school graduates, because of the cost of education, the distance of education, these are barriers for them to go to more of a tier 1 university. So they tend to go to local universities, maybe for a couple of years, get an associate degree, and then from there maybe transfer to a much larger university. But what happens is the cost of living at school is very expensive, whereby when we look at urban air taxi capability, to be able to go to a university that could be 100 miles away can now be done on a daily commute. Or for most students, they're not going to school on a daily basis. They might only have classes a couple of days a week. So we've looked at that trade-off, and there's a big difference between staying in a dorm or on-campus living compared to being able to live at home and just commute when they need to without having that long 2-hour, 2.5-hour drive. Looking at our production capability, one thing that has not been publicly announced yet that I'm pleased to present here is we are going to fly a demonstrator aircraft this year. What we have done is we've had a technology demonstrator that we've acquired from a previous company. The aircraft is being retrofitted and modified to be able to provide additional technology, enabling technology demonstrations. It will be a little bit of a cross of a hybrid aircraft. It will have an internal combustion engine in it, as well as electric power in the aircraft that will allow us to vet out more of the enabling technologies. Our goal is to have that aircraft flight worthy and providing flight demonstrations in November of this year for our marketing, as well as for our technology enablement, and then also in the United States working with the United States Air Force on a program called Agility Prime. So that is a big initiative for us, and we're very excited to put that into place. And it will also have the ability to start to train our pilots and our future pilots, and it will help our development team, such as BAE Systems that we work with very closely on energy management and fly-by-wire flight control capabilities, to be able to have a better understanding of the operational aspects of our aircraft. There are our other team partners and enablers will also be able to participate in this program. So kind of wrapping it up, our integrated infrastructure solution is an integral part of manufacturing this aircraft and getting this aircraft programmed to reality. It's not just about the aircraft, it's about the ecosystem. So I'm going to stop at that point, and I thank every one of you for attending, and I'll be more than happy to try to answer any questions.
Caden, that was brilliant. Thank you very much for that. We obviously had a conversation last night where we discussed many of these things, and the big thing that really caught my attention was Jaunt's approach to the development of the ecosystem, which I think is so important, and it just mirrors some of what Boeing did when they started rolling out some of their early aircraft. I have a question, and again, we discussed it last night, and it comes from Charles Alcock, and he was wondering whether or not that you believe the fallout from COVID-19 will slow development of eVTOL for UAM, and possibly thin the herd, as we were talking about. Do you still believe that the lack of funding is going to be affected by COVID?
I don't, Charles. It's a great question. I enjoy Charles's questions and have been following him. So what happens is you use the term thin the herd. I think that's a great analogy, if you will. What we're seeing, the thinning the herd just being accelerated from COVID. I think that there's a natural progression. We've talked to several companies actually that have approached us that have been developing an aircraft, have burnt through up to their Series A round or more, and realize that, you know, to go the full development of a flight certifiable aircraft, it requires not just a lot of money, but a lot of know-how and working with partners. That's why, for example, in terms of the airframe structure, we're teamed with Triumph Aerospace Systems. They build large aircraft structures. They know how to certify these aircraft. Again, I mentioned BAE Systems. They build fly-by-wire systems. So it's not just a matter of money. So it's a matter of having your business model really properly vetted out and having the teams that are capable of getting you to where you need to be. So a lot of the contributions that these early startup aircraft design companies have been doing, they have developed enabling technologies which they can repurpose, which I think will feed into the industry. So I think from an investor perspective, you need to look at some of the numbers. The venture capital community has been, I don't want to say non-existent, but they have not been playing heavily in this particular airspace. So what they're doing is they're kind of sitting back and seeing what's happening. They're developing enabling technologies that can play across the board of multiple airframe configurations, but they're not really investing in a particular aircraft. So you're not seeing the VC money that's there. Same thing with private equity money. A lot of the funding that's been going on is private funding. And yes, there's been a little bit of a delay there, but the markets are coming back here in the US and around the world. We're starting to see opportunities for perhaps a vaccine that's going to be around the corner. And these impact how individuals, angels, high net worth individuals, corporate venture funds are going to be spending their money. So I think, you know, from our perspective, it happens to be with the model. There are so many other things that need to be done: real estate development, the whole infrastructure, energy management, distribution, repurposing technologies. They're not going to stop. So that's what's important, is to make sure from our end, for example, we're looking at retiring our batteries from the aircraft at an end of life earlier than normal, because we want to repurpose those batteries to serve into sustainable buildings, which would be perhaps our own buildings that we're utilizing to support our aircraft at the FBOs. So again, all of this ties together, and I think that's what's huge for people to understand. Do not ignore the infrastructure. We've been working infrastructure for years, and it's an integral part of the whole urban air taxi venue.
That's brilliant. There is another question from Robert Torgensen, but we're running a little bit late on time. I'll ask you if you could respond directly, but it's about some of the timing which was presented in your slide and some of the information that you've given to us. So I'll let you address that directly.
Sure.
Caden, absolutely brilliant. Really appreciate your time and effort and looking forward to engaging with you in the very near future, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I thank everyone. I happen to know Bob. Bob, please feel free to contact me. Again, thanks for everybody for participating. And Daryl, wonderful venue. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the other speakers and participating with the attendees. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you. Right. Okay. So now we have a pre-recorded session from Graham Cooper. Graham's the project director of decarbonization of transport at the National Grid. So this is going to run for about 11 minutes. So just as we're getting this going, please sit back, watch, and enjoy.
Good afternoon.
There we go.
Cooper, I'm the Project Director for Transport Decarbonisation at National Grid. Thank you very much to Foresight Aerospace for asking me to come and speak to you today. I hope that by bringing in grid and energy infrastructure perspective to this discussion, it'll help broaden the knowledge and experience of those in the room. So many people know the name National Grid and make assumptions about what we do, but a lot of people don't really know the detail of what we do, but also more importantly, the detail of what we don't do. So National Grid is the owner of the UK electricity transmission system in England and Wales. And National Grid is also the gas transmission owner in England, Scotland and Wales. So in essence, we are the energy motorways of the energy system. And then you have at a local level, the local roads of that energy system, as it were, are the regional GDNs for gas and the regional DNOs for electricity. Now, National Grid, and one of these many misconceptions is National Grid doesn't make electricity. National Grid doesn't buy electricity. National Grid doesn't sell electricity. Effectively, National Grid is the conduit of from where energy is made through to where energy is consumed. National Grid are a price regulated monopoly regulated by Ofgem. And therefore, through the license conditions, we have to be technology agnostic and treat everybody the same. The interesting thing from a grid perspective is the energy system has never been cleaner than it is today. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, the dirtiest thing we did as a country was make energy. And interestingly, in 2019, that changed. So in 2019, we generated more electricity from clean sources than from burning stuff. So that's quite an important milestone, that the grid is clean, the cleanest it's ever been, and getting cleaner. We still have some way to go, but we are broadly en route to achieving the potential of having an energy system that is carbon neutral by the late 2040s. I guess we see this actually in the news more recently, that we are now over a month without burning coal on the energy system. So that shows you that coal is slowly disappearing off the system and often being replaced by large-scale offshore wind. We have the offshore wind sector deal that is coming forward and delivering 40 gigawatts of offshore wind in the next 10 to 15 years. So you'll see that the power system is clean and getting cleaner at scale. So where is our infrastructure? Obviously, aviation is a point-to-point industry from where people and goods and services need to travel from and to. And what's more important, when you look at our energy networks, we have 346 substations across the UK. And if you drive the motorways and dual carriageways of the UK, you can't go very far without seeing our infrastructure. More importantly, though, centres of commerce and airports are huge consumers of energy. And so all of our networks interconnect between airports and these major urban hubs, which means our infrastructure is probably pretty near to where you need to use it. As you'll see from the chart on the screen now, aviation isn't one of the largest emitters of carbon emissions when you look at the measures that you see on screen. Road-based transport is obviously largest. More interestingly, though, the aviation sector has been under some scrutiny because it isn't on a pathway towards net zero. Now, what we'll see probably across later this year is the Department for Transport Decarbonisation of Transport Plan, which is due to be published at the end of the year. We are likely to see in that greater pressure on aviation to get cleaner and greener, but also we are likely to see other forms of aviation, as those in the audience will know, through manned, unmanned flight, drone deliveries, those sort of technologies that are not yet counted because they don't really exist at scale. So, more importantly, we need to ensure, and the country, due to its legally binding carbon targets and the challenge of climate change, needs to be able to help facilitate aviation on that net zero pathway. What we've seen in the narrative from government is that they're keen for the country to recover post-corona, and when they think about recovery, it is to recover more sensibly to where we want to get to, as opposed to recovery to where we were. So we're likely to see any kind of bailout and support to be directly linked to cleaning and greening of the aviation sector. That's a challenge for all of us, but these things are infinitely possible, and I know as a sector you often rise to the challenge. So irrespective of the types of aircraft that we are looking to get cleaner and greener, be that single passenger drones, conversion of existing combustion-based vehicles to electrification, or new innovative electric planes, or planes powered by hydrogen, or even planes powered by synthetic jet A1, all of these are possible. However, all of those energy vectors are incredibly reliant on large sources of power to be able to make that happen. So across those energy vectors I touched on briefly before, we've got battery electric vehicles, and that will obviously require charging at the fastest possible rate for utilisation purposes. That needs a reasonable sized grid connection. Hydrogen is an interesting one because at the moment, to make it cleaner and greener, you need to use clean electrical energy through an electrolyser to give you green hydrogen. Now, the challenge here is that's only a couple of % of hydrogen in the system right now, and that needs a pretty reasonable grid connection for you to be able to do that. But you can obviously utilise storage to help flex that generation capacity. More importantly, for hydrogen is 97% of the hydrogen currently in the market at the moment is dirty. It's created from a dirty source. So until we can prove and have demonstrators that give carbon capture and storage market the scale that it needs, we will see hydrogen as coming along, but it'll be later in towards or later on the pathway towards net zero. But it is in stream and is likely to come forward. Obviously, ammonia, compared to hydrogen, slightly easier to transport. Doesn't need to be pressurized; it's in a liquid form, and obviously relates to hydrogen. But those do need significant energy inputs to create that. And then finally, we've got synthetic jet A1 and the aviation biofuels. Again, you needed a lot of energy to be able to create those fuels. So in all of those scenarios, whatever the energy vector is into the vehicle, you need a reasonable grid connection and therefore reasonable grid capacity to be able to create those fuels. So those need to be considered on the journey towards net zero. And then finally, I just really wanted to point out that, the energy infrastructure, both at transmission level and distribution level, is the enabler of this low carbon and innovative aviation future. So the energy sector doesn't know aviation, we know energy and infrastructure. So we're here to listen. We want to understand what you're trying to achieve, try and help work with you on developing a solution. Just a reminder that we're technology agnostic, we can deliver the infrastructure for all of your future transport ambitions. And energy infrastructure is generally expensive, long lead time items, and therefore, so that the energy infrastructure can be in the right place at the right time, we need the transport and aviation sector to indicate what it needs and by when, so that we are able to help plan ahead to make sure that we are the enabler of your low carbon future. What I'd also say here is that we're bringing three large business sectors together, three separate markets together to deliver success here. So we're looking at energy, we're looking at digital, and we're looking at aviation. Those three sectors need to collaborate greatly for this to be a success. So that's my presentation. I appreciate that it is a quick trot through what National Grid is and what it's not, and that we are here to be the enabler of this low carbon aviation future. So I'm sure this will stimulate some questions, and I'm sure we can pick those up at another time. My contact details are on the last slide. I hope that you have a really good rest of your day, and thanks again to Foresight Aerospace for asking me to speak to you today. Thank you. Goodbye.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Graham. As some of you can see, he's actually in the chat room. He has some connectivity challenges, so he's welcoming everybody to either contact him through the webinar chat or contact him through his LinkedIn account or his contact details, which were up there, and we'll make sure that they become available for everyone. Right, so now we're going to hand over to Lawrence Blakely. He's the head of power supply at Vertical Aerospace. Nice to see you, sir. It's been a little while. I think the last time that I saw you could have been in London
yes.
when you guys had your nice little toy.
Yes,
well,
it was.
Toy. That's a bit
Yes.
cheeky, isn't it? So I'll hand directly over to you, sir. So please let us know what's going on with Vertical.
Thank you very much. I will just share my screen. So can I check that everyone can see the presentation?
We can see it. If you can just, yeah, there you go. Well done.
Perfect. It's amusing you described that as a toy, Daryl. It's a very big toy.
I apologize.
No, it's fine. It was fun to play with. So I've been asked to talk today about creating disruptive technology. What's interesting about this is the technology is an enabler to actually create something even more disruptive. It's not just the technology. The form of transport that we are looking at and that was touched on by Caden in Jaunt, it's a disrupting platform of travel, not just the technology. The technologies are an enabler and a very important enabler. I also really like being described as a disruptor. I think that's quite amusing. My parents find that quite amusing too. Just to give a bit of an overview of Vertical Aerospace, for those of you that don't know, we were actually formed back in 2016. Grew to about 6 people in 2017, and that group of 6 people built and flew what we call the proof of concept. That was really taking off-the-shelf technology from various different industries. The motors were semi-aerospace, the motor drives certainly weren't aerospace, nor was the battery. The landing gear was aerospace, so it was taking all these things off the shelf and basically just proving out that the technology that was available was good enough to start this journey towards creating an eVTOL aircraft for the UAM market. Clearly that proved that the technology was ready, so we moved to what we now call Seraph, the toy, Daryl, that you had the pleasure of seeing in London, and actually that was a really specific activity to look at, can we take this off-the-shelf technology and create redundant systems that would evolve to satisfy the aerospace requirements that were talked about a bit earlier. And that's kind of led us to this multi-copter arrangement. The big test that we wanted to prove out was, can we lose one of the propulsors? So can we lose a motor, which is what we ended up demonstrating, and continue the safe flight and landing. And it was a particularly nerve-wracking day when actually we demonstrated this, but what we did demonstrate was you can lose a propulsor, and the benefits of electrical distribution mean that you can continue safe flight and landing. This is not something that is specifically unique to vertical aerospace. And the technology is there, and we're using pretty much off-the-shelf technology. And we demonstrated again that the technology was ready, and really we can start moving forward with our next, our actual core product that we want to develop. I'm not going to talk about that product. It is a winged product. It's a multi-copter winged product, and it will obviously take off vertically and fly conventionally. I will talk about some of the technology with respect to the Seraph vehicles, more commercially acceptable. There's a lot of different areas where technology needs to develop, but just developing technology is not necessarily disruptive. Disruption is where you've got to start from the ground up again and then surpass what was already there. And if you look at some of these groupings, composite structure, I am not suggesting that we are going to develop a new composite structure that will surpass what was previously there. Composite structure is something that we will evolve and optimize. It's not going to be disruptive. Where we look at disruption are really the other three areas. In blue, it's the powertrain. We've broken it down here, but it's the powertrain. Lift rotors, and actually that's been pulled out of powertrain to focus on noise. That's one of the key requirements for these types of vehicles. And then the flight control system. So I'm just going to touch on these areas. As I'm sure you know, there's a lot of complexity here. I could probably speak for the next hour or so on across the aircraft, but I will try and focus. So when you look at the flight control, you have a bit of this question when you look at some of the multi-copters out there, and certainly small drones have this this way of controlling flight. So particularly in yaw, which is what really this picture is showing, the attitude of the vehicle is now very much controlled by controlling the speed or the torque, however is decided for the propellers. And then when you go through transition, when you're a winged vehicle, again, how you control that vehicle is completely different to how aircraft are controlled now. So you can't take a flight control system and just modify it and you get a flight control system for a UAM. You've got to go and start from the ground up and rebuild this control system and rebuild the control laws that sit on that control system. Jaunt will have this too. When you're taking off, you're in one mode. When you transition, you are moving into a different mode. The flight controls are doing different things. The aircraft's behavior are doing different things. There'll be a position during that transition where you have a blend of different controls. And this is from the ground up. So that is a disruption in how the technology is going to be used moving forwards. Moving to the motors, those eagle-eyed of you will note that these are MRAX motors, very, very capable and a nice off-the-shelf option. When you look at motors and inverters, they kind of go together. Really, there needs to be a step change in the power density and of these items. the way they're cooled, the way they're operated in conjunction with this flight control system. You can't take something off the shelf. You can't go to an automotive, which is where a lot of the electric drive is being developed at the moment, and take their motor and just plug it into a vertical UAM aircraft. The use case is different. The whole mission profile is different. So again, you've got to start from ground zero. If you want to have an optimized solution, you have to start from ground zero. So I've touched on rotors. Noise is really one of the key enablers. I'm just going to reflect on Battersea in London. Battersea is really, my time check, Battersea is really very much defined.
Sorry, it's not a time check, it's a noise meter. My toy.
The number of landings per hour in Battersea is defined by noise. I think it's 6 landings per hour, and it's really about the social disturbance that a helicopter, in this case, is causing. Now, you lower the noise, you increase the number of landings per hour, and suddenly you have a really good displacement business case for these vehicles to immediately hit the market. So it's a really fundamental point. If these vehicles are just as loud as a helicopter, there's something that's missed. So again, the way to disrupt this marketplace is to create a step change in how the vehicles are perceived, and that perception is really very much based around noise when you speak to the general public. And I think this is the final technology. Let's not forget the battery. This is a Tesla. There's quite a few cylindrical cells here. The beauty of a car, any problem you have, you just stop. You get out, you call the rescue service, and you wait maybe an hour and everything's fine. You clearly don't have that luxury in a vehicle, in a flying vehicle. So you can't take a battery pack that has been designed for one use and put it on an aircraft. The whole packaging concept, the way that failures are dealt with in a flying vehicle, in a eVTOL aircraft, is very, very different to a car. So you've got to start from the ground up, and you've got to approach the problem in a very different way. And a part of that problem is not just thinking about what are the regulations, it's then thinking about how is the vehicle going to be operated, what is the ground staff going to do in certain scenarios. So it's very much, you start from the beginning of the problem. You have all of these options of technology, and you have to project yourself 5 years into the future and try and guess, how is my vehicle going to be operated? And that's a great place to be. It's disrupting how batteries are going to be developed and designed, completely different to cars. So what's next? What's next for Vertical is to take some of these technologies I've just been talking about and develop a winged concept. Vertical is really very much driven by creating physical products. As you've seen, we've created 2 full-size aircraft, and we will continue with that philosophy of creating full-size aircraft. We also will be proving out some of those technologies I touched on. It's going to be a staged approach. You don't build Rome in a day, but to create this disruption, we are starting from ground zero on some of these technologies. I'm really very much focused on what is the problem that we're trying to solve here. So you'll see later this year, maybe we'll announce what our product is. Certainly next year we will be flying our product Q2. That's the target at the moment, COVID depending in some cases, obviously. And that's the end of my presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lawrence. That was a great summary, and I think you really hit it on the head in terms of why a lot of companies are having a bit of challenge. You have to really address it from the ground up,
Yes.
and start back from first principles. It's not just bolt some motors and some batteries together, then all of a sudden throw a passenger on it, even though we've all seen the videos of people converting bathtubs into passenger VTOLs. It's not quite as easy.
I think the certification plan for that would be quite a challenge.
I would love to see the wind tunnel testing for that one. It would certainly be interesting. So I do have one question about if you've looked at hydrogen fuel cell options for your vehicles. Is that something that you're looking at, or are you going to stick primarily to the battery platform at present?
Very good question. It's something we've very much looked at, trying to understand what the technology readiness level is for at the moment. When is it going to be best placed to put on our aircraft? I think one of the views that we have at the moment is we want to certify an aircraft with known technology that we can control, and that we can put a very clear development path in place for. I would say that hydrogen at the moment has some unknown around it. Our first vehicle is very much likely to be a battery-based vehicle, but we cannot ignore the possibility of a range extension to the capabilities of a pure battery aircraft.
Yeah.
So there's probably hydrogen is the most obvious, but there are other options there available to how can you extend the range, moving from this 100-mile to a 200, 300-mile aircraft.
Yeah. Okay. And of course, that just leads on to the last question about the safety of lithium-ion cells today. I think we probably all agree that they're not quite there yet, but there's significant strides towards that.
Yeah, and I would say that they've probably had some bad press. It's very easy to abuse lithium-ion batteries, and then you see some bad press. And it's also very easy to abuse them if you're missing some steps in how do you protect your lithium-ion batteries from thermal runaway, which is the ultimate problem.
Yeah.
Millions of cars are driving now with lithium-ion batteries in, and we don't see a problem. You see a problem where there's exploratory activities going on. So I don't really see it as a long-term problem. I see it as there's going to be some issues in the short term as the technology matures, particularly around how do you deal with certain types of failures. I don't expect that to progress past the prototype phase. Obviously, nobody wants a failure, but actually having a failure helps you define where the boundaries are, and then you can pull back and you know you're working in a safe environment at that point. So I wouldn't say it's the worst thing to have a failure, as long as you do it in a controlled way, clearly.
Brilliant. Right. Well, thank you very much for that, sir. I'm going to move us on. We're running a few minutes over time, but I don't think people will mind going into the lunch break, just that the conversations have been so interesting. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. So we have David Rotblatt, the UAM project leader for Embraer X. We have Remy, and you're going to have to forgive me in the pronunciation of your surname, sir. Petit frère.
Petit frère, so little brother in French. Remy Petit frère.
Petit frère. So you're the head of a European market for EHang. We have Dan Hayes, the CEO from VRCO, and of course we have Caden, who's hung on patiently through the last session. And really, the discussion is about the vision for urban air mobility and the airspace question. And I get lots of questions said, well, the airspace isn't ready. It's not going to be there. I have a different opinion. I think over time, as we start getting volume in the skies, the ANSPs, air navigation service providers, will start to catch up. And I think that the drone industry is running at it. And so they're starting to develop the systems and processes that we're going to need, and we'll hopefully inherit those. So I'm going to go through in the order of which it's been set out in the program provided by Eric. So we'll ask first David to set out his stall, then Remy, Dan, and then last but not least, Caden. So please, David.
So, Daryl, initial thoughts on the issue of airspace and urban air mobility, is that correct? Okay, great. Thanks, Daryl. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hello from Boston, Massachusetts. So, as Daryl mentioned, I'm the project leader for Embraer-X's Urban Air Traffic Management Project. It's a procedures-based approach to thinking about how we can get greater utilization out of the airspace and procedures that we currently have as we think about an evolving approach towards more autonomous solutions, as both the vehicles and the technology that supports those vehicles mature in their respective capabilities. At least in the United States, there are over 11 cities that currently use helicopter routes, helicopter approaches that are published on websites like SkyVector, which you can look up. I use some of those routes myself when I fly in Boston, one of those cities that has specific helicopter routes and procedures. And my feeling is that, along with others in industry, that those existing routes and procedures are a good place to start. Urban air mobility is a new concept for many, but it really goes back to 1947 with the launch of Los Angeles Airways, then soon after that, New York Airways, which Caden was mentioning from Jaunt. And as we think about how this industry has evolved from those days to what we have today, which is still conventional helicopters, but now you can fly them using shared economy booking platforms like Blade in New York City, for example, or the recent Voom, which I use frequently in Sao Paulo. The continuing lowering of the price point as the shared economy business model has created value for more people to access a more accessible price point, has shown that this industry can scale using the existing procedures and routes that we have today. But as a commercial pilot myself with over 18 years of flying experience, I've flown in some of the busiest airspace in the world, and I hear these controllers really operating at their max capability, at least at peak times, to the point where they can't even stop to catch a breath because they have so many instructions to share. And so I think as this industry scales, we will see that the ability for voice-based communication to manage not only the volume of aircraft, but the number of missions flying every day will eventually show that that's untenable, at least in the largest cities. And so what we want to do is to examine, and we're currently doing this with 2 air navigation service providers, one in the Eastern Hemisphere and one in the Western Hemisphere. How can we take a look at just a piece of the airspace where dense, low altitude urban missions are happening? So dense urban environments where we have the convergence of conventional airliners that are descending from their flight levels, getting ready to land, drones and urban air mobility aircraft all converging on the same place, vying for access to Bravo airspace. That's where the market is, that's where we can learn. And that's why, at least in part, we call this urban air mobility. So how can we get greater utilization out of that airspace? Looking at the procedures. And so Embraer-X is very proud to partner with a few air navigation service providers where we're taking this procedures-based approach to thinking about how we can rethink the infrastructure that supports this industry. And so we're hoping that through demonstrating this approach in our simulations, we'll be able to move the needle to a point where we've been able to challenge the status quo, and these air navigation service providers will be able to really look at new and innovative ways of getting greater utility out of our airspace. So that, in a nutshell, is our view on how we can help enable this next generation of urban air mobility and the project that we're currently incubating. Thank you, Darren.
Sorry, struggling for the mute button. Remy, it'd be great if you could share your point. I was going to ask you, are you sat outside? It's very blue behind you.
Actually, yeah, I'm in the office of one of my friends. There is a seaside behind. I am inside, actually. Just there is a curtain and a window.
Beautiful view. It's a nice day here as well. So anyway, love to hear your point of view. But I will mention I saw the press release about the Ehang Hotel, which I thought was a very interesting project. So I'll let you carry on, sir. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so Ehang Hotel is the latest co-branding we did, but that's not our main business. It's a good use case. Actually, in our business, we're looking to develop as much use case worldwide as we can. As you know, Ehang has been founded in 2014. We got first our machine ready in 2016, which is a 184, one-seater, 8 propeller, 4 arms. And now we are developing and flying for already several years, 216, two-seater 16 propellers, which is fully electric. lithium batteries, and which now is the first commercialized eVTOL in the world. We're not a big company, but we already entered the NASDAQ last December. It's a Chinese company which is developing very well worldwide. We are the first air taxi to fly in US. Also, a few months ago in North Carolina, we've flown in Dubai, we've flown in Amsterdam, in Vienna, very soon in France, and we are developing very good partnership worldwide. We want to develop as really to stay very technical about our machine. Our founder, Mr. Hu Huazhi, one of China's best genius currently, that I admire very much. He's himself very much into technical, not just business. And this is a very interesting for a very creative and dynamic company. And what we want to do is to develop quickly in all the Western markets, to find some interesting distributors, some interesting use cases. And that's a big challenge. It's of course a certification of our machine, which is already flying, and certified already now on the China market with a commercial line opening in Guangzhou, with machine flying also during coronavirus time between hospital to carry equipment. So we are flying already. We are operating already. Now we want to develop in Europe. We want to develop in the West. We want to develop in US. We have the authorization of flying, the permit in Norway. Norway is a very interesting territory. You have 40% of electric vehicles. You have very interesting use cases to reach the oil platform on heavy wind, and to land on a moving boat, same as we can have on Rotterdam port. Also very interesting cases. And also in cities, we both can see you know our machine. You can see the chassis of a machine. We can either have a cabin to carry 2 passengers, but we can also have the logistic version, which is very interesting and which might be even easier to put into place quickly in terms of flying permit.
Right, brilliant. Thank you very much. We just have a quick question here on the flight time of the EHang, but I'm sure that's probably available on your website.
Yeah, actually, we're upgrading the flight time every day in the same time as our research is developing every day. Fully loaded, the machine can fly more than 30 minutes. With 2 passengers, fully electric, it can reload in 4 hours, and it fly between 110 and 130 kilometers per hour. So we have a range between 50 and 70 kilometers, depending on the climbing of operation, which is already very large. And we plan to develop and very soon to release even a bigger machine. And that's going to be a very good surprise coming.
So with reference to the discussion about the airspace issues, I would imagine that once you have access to the Chinese airspace and dealing with the military who's control over the largest part of the airspace in China, it would be interesting to get your point of view on working with regulators and with the ANSPs to try and open up the airspace or to manage that airspace question.
Yeah, completely. And that's something which is very interesting in the world of the eVTOL, is that there is not really competitors. There is more colleagues. We're all fighting the same fight of certification and flying permit and so on. And as a case in China, we got the support of the Chinese government, which is very happy to get some new technologies. It's good for what we name the China soft power, to get very good technology. So the environment is very friendly. Our market now, we already pre-sold 10,000 machines in the world, a big part of it in China, with 200 machines operating in the next, by the end of 2020, but things have been delayed a little bit because of the coronavirus. And for the China certification, we have big support to make it make it there. So it's not a big issue. Now to tropicalize the machine to a European standard. And no matter the CAA, the DJC, the EASA, and so on, it's always complicated because it's more than 50 kilos. The machine is 240 kilo empty, so it's not a drone. It's not a light airplane. It's not an airplane. It's not an helicopter. So certification got to involve. EASA is understanding that. They're very willing to work with us on that kind of development. And the key is actually, and that's what we are doing in Norway and we're developing in the rest of Europe and the rest of the world, the key is to find use cases. Is to find use cases and to prove our machine is reliable through use cases, through flying from point A to point B, a flying permit, and then start to work the appreciation and the acceptation both of the public, but also of the professional, and maybe to change one thing or two on the machine to be acceptable globally in European airspace. But we have to start locally in every country.
Brilliant, thank you. Dan, sir, over to you. Sorry, Dan, I'm having a hard time picking you up. Do you want to start again, please? No, unfortunately, we're not getting the audio through.
Go to the next one.
Oh, I can hear you now, Dan.
Okay, brilliant. Oh, right.
There we go.
Yeah. So yeah, VRCO's vision for its contribution or participation in the eVTOL urban air mobility market is pretty targeted at the moment. We're developing a two-seater initially, which will be an eVTOL craft, and it will have a range of, we hope, around 75 miles, obviously to be proven in real life conditions. And we're specifically looking to tailor our offering to those who already utilize private transport means. So we're seeing potentially those with multiple properties. They have an international mindset. They already take conventional private aviation options, and this will be able to augment their transfer journeys to be able to go from their residence to say Biggin Hill or to whatever private jet terminal. And so your initial introduction this morning was really well received, as it painted that landscape about how this mode of transport, it needs to integrate with the regional and the international carriers. And I thought that was really powerful, and there's a few things in there, if you don't mind, I'd like to borrow.
Sure, we can arrange something.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess just to sum up our vision or strategy is that if we do this well and we do it with the right partners, we've come to realize that we do need really good partners, and we're extremely grateful for the support that we're getting through the Future Flight competition and some of the consortium that we're party of there, and some of the competitions like the Agility Prime in the US as well, which we're now participating in. It really feels like there is a lot of capability coming together, and we're delighted to be able to partner up with those. But what we're hoping is if we do this well, then that will give us the credibility to then enter the larger capacity market. So we're looking at a 4 or a 6-seater. But first things first, let's get a full-size 2-seater prototype flying. Let's see that it does achieve all the objectives, mainly around the safety, around the connectivity, around the charging time, the cycles, the range, all of those key metrics that I think everyone, you only get to see it in real life. So yeah, that's our vision.
That's brilliant. So the question about the airspace, you feel that the appropriate structures, processes, and equipment will be available for you when you're able to bring your vehicle to market.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the advantages of not being first to market. But we are very active in, I guess, digital autonomous low altitude urban airspace management, and we have our own system that we're developing, and we're able to ingest all the different other types of objects that we're anticipating being up in the air. We're able to optimize how those aircraft should be interacting with each other, and we're able to see what the peaks will be and where it falls over, and then we're able to underpin that away from human control into autonomous control. So yeah, I agree with the other speakers that it is vital that we move to a digital airspace management tool.
Brilliant. Caden, I see you've been responding to Alistair's question on safety there. So that's brilliant. Also, David, brilliant. But in your presentation, you talked about developing the entire ecosystem, and I know that will be addressing issues of airspace and airspace management and use, because my view of electric aviation is I don't necessarily want to see eVTOLs in the skies like you would see in the Jetsons. I think if we get to that kind of a solution, then our city planners have utterly failed us. And I know that they're all working very hard at trying to enable mobility, and that aviation is another mode of transport that we can use effectively in the right way. Maybe give us your spin on what you see the future is like, and the use of that airspace asset, in recognition that it is, like the ground, a finite resource that we can use.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it, Daryl. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Wow, thanks. Everybody's comments were wonderful. My memory tends to be short term, but I'm going to go all the way back to David Rothblatt, who had said some very interesting things, David. I appreciated your comment as a former or maybe a current commercial pilot. I too, have flown professionally and commercially. I think that the airspace issue is very challenging, but what we've done at Jaunt is we actually started looking at the airspace over 5 years ago. So I want to say a couple of things. One, when we look at urban air mobility and we look at the pilots of urban air mobility, my background is deeply rooted in military aviation, military operations. So when I started looking at, well, what are the most austere operations you can have today in a commercial environment? And I kept focusing on helicopter air ambulance operations, HAAO, aeromedical evac, and found out that many of the pilots were former military. Many of them I know and been served with in various capacities during my days with the Department of Defense and Military Services. For example, these pilots, they land anywhere. They have special dispensation to go through Class B airspace. They can land in your backyard. They can get, again, special dispensation and abate noise issues. They land on roadways. They land in inclement weather. A lot of the pilots in the aircraft, the EC-135s and other aircraft they fly, are heavily instrumented. They're SPIFR flights. Pilots are flying white phosphorus. I mean, it's amazing what they are doing. They understand the urban air mobility airspace. And we've talked to pilots and spent numerous hours and years studying this. And what happens is the way they operate in and out of the traditional airspace sector is much different than the way they operate out in the, what I'll say, Class C, D type of airspace environments. So there's two things there. One is that while we look at metroplexes from Uber's perspective, what we see that the complexity of putting 2,000 aircraft in an environment which is already entrenched in Class B airspace, and then figure out how these aircraft are going to ingress and egress every 8 to 15 minutes, that's one problem. Another problem becomes one of, the whole situational awareness of understanding where the other aircraft are in the air, not just from an ATC perspective, but from the person sitting in the cockpit. I'm sure, David, you want to know what's outside your aircraft, just like I always want to know what's outside my aircraft. ADS-B in and out, great. It does wonderful things. But when you start getting down into the low airspace, you don't get that connectivity and that ability. So some of the things that we've been doing is working with companies that have been developing unique sensors that are applicable to autonomous drones as well as piloted aircraft, that as we get down into the low airspace where you don't have really good communication bandwidth capabilities, and ADS-B isn't giving you the results that you want to know of near proximity, and there's other systems, but if you don't have TCAS and other systems available to you, it's a difficult situation. So let's push that out, because these are all issues I'm putting in silos. One of the other issues that gets very rarely spoken about is emergency procedures. One, the pilots themselves, you can have 18,000 flight hours in a couple of different types of aircraft, but the emergency procedures of a multi-copter, for example, is a different beast altogether. It operates differently. Our aircraft has the ability to land with a zero roll at any height velocity. Helicopters can't do that. Drones may not be able to do that, most likely can't. And even manned multicopters are looking at either highly redundant systems so that if they lose a prop, they don't have to worry about having ballistic recovery systems on their aircraft. But if you look at the airspace, I was flying a twin coming in over Miami many years ago from overseas. And what happened is I had a complete electrical failure, had to declare an in-flight emergency, and flying into Miami International, basically you had to reroute all the heavies, all the other traffic was out of there because I had no comm whatsoever. You know, the F-16s were deployed, they're flying next to me. It changes the whole infrastructure of ATC, just one single emergency, and it starts to back up everything. Another great example is we work with the flight crew. David, I believe you mentioned you're from Boston. So in Boston is Boston MedFlight. Boston MedFlight happened to be the aeromedical providers in the airspace during the Boston Marathon bombing. If you can imagine in that situation, not knowing, is this another 911, you have a whole different scenario. You have heavies, large cabin, coming in from overseas. They want to get down to the ground. So in the meantime, you've got military aircraft, National Guard, state police, air ambulance. They want to get up in the air. That makes for a very congested airspace and very intense environment for the air traffic controllers. It's very, very difficult time for them to do that. So a lot of the rotary wing aircraft had to fly in very low airspace. And when I say just above, it's called nappity earth. And they're flying literally right above the treetops to get out of the way so the heavies can get down, and even rerouting them to Kennedy and to other airports. They just didn't have fuel on board. So again, when we look at the airspace procedures, you know, talking automation, well, that's down the road. One of the things that we're looking at with Jaunt from our perspective is to take a look at, let's, you know, eat this elephant one bite at a time. We are looking at staging our aircraft in support of Uber, but also looking at staging the aircraft in over 550 different, what I'm going to call uncontrolled airspace that, you know, if you're a pilot, you would understand that. So an uncontrolled airspace around the globe. These are areas that can allow, if you build the right infrastructure, and it might be just a platform in a parking lot for a large employer with 150,000 employees or more that want to just move employees in and out. That's a different way of operating. And this gives all of the airspace you know, infrastructure players an opportunity to learn how to start absorbing, you know, these aircraft that have very, very unique capabilities. They also have very limited ranges comparatively to ICE aircraft, which means they also have limited, reserve time. So this is something that we are looking at. So we intend to operate more in the suburban outer areas and learn how to manage the airspace, the aircraft management, the queuing of the aircraft, as well as work with the air traffic control, the FAA here in the US, TC in Canada, CAA, the ISA. So these are things that I think have to be evolutionary in how they get done, as opposed to a revolutionary change in airspace management.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
I'll tell you, I think this discussion has really sparked the audience. We've got 5 open questions, and I'm going to put the first one up, which comes from Neil Cluffley, and Neil will be speaking with us a little bit later this afternoon. But he mentions that the R44 was, it's just disappeared on me, can be electrified quite easily. So he's kind of wondering why yourselves as makers of vehicles aren't looking at existing airframes and electrifying them as opposed to the path that you're setting down now in terms of developing your own bespoke technology. What's the appeal of doing what you're doing versus just electrifying existing vehicles. So maybe Dan can give us his view on it.
Yeah, I think it comes down to our design. I'm not going to go into too much details, but we're getting quite a bit of efficiency over a traditional helicopter there in terms of range and lift. And then it comes to how we're going to be manufacturing these. So we're not going down a traditional manufacturing route. I'll just allude that we're using composites, a lot of composites, which are ultra lightweight, and we're using 3D technologies for the printing of various parts and the core airframe itself, which gives us a much lighter airframe. So we're trying to produce an aircraft that's going to be very, very light in terms of power to weight ratio. And then it comes down to the mission profile. So a helicopter can land vertically in an urban environment, but it's not permitted to do so today unless it's at a designated heliport. What we're trying to do here is to offer something that is substantially different. Obviously, the difference, or I guess the reason they're not allowed to land, would be the safety case, the fact they're carrying liquid fuel, the noise, and so forth. If we have an electric helicopter like Volocopter, then potentially they will be overcoming those restrictions. But we've seen the fabulous work that Volocopter are doing on that. So they've got that space, I think, for the electric helicopter market, and they've really nailed it. And yeah, all credit to them. We're going after a different part of the market, and it just wouldn't make sense for us to electrify a conventional airframe.
Remy, David, I'd be interested in hearing your opinions on it, because obviously you're both coming from different ends of the perspective. EHang more development, just startup, lots of components being put together, whereas Embraer has a long history in the aerospace sector. So I'd really like to understand your points of view on that question.
Okay, David, you want to start or?
Sure. Thanks, Remy. So I apologize, Joe. The reason why the question disappeared was I just finished typing a very quick answer.
Oh, right.
And then it went into the answered bucket. So sorry about that. I'll just expound upon what I wrote there. So essentially, R44s are a great platform to learn from when it comes to the electrification of R44s. But my personal understanding is that the max gross weight of an R44, so approximately 2,400 pounds, when you add the battery, doesn't leave enough payload for the average sized passenger or passengers to make an R44 commercial operation economically viable. And if you look at the majority of eVTOL manufacturers out there today, it's at least 2+1, and most I think are 4+1, so 4 passengers plus a pilot configuration, and that in some cases is still with razor thin margins. Mm-hmm. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of eVTOLs looking very large, because the amount of batteries they need to take is significant to be able to provide that kind of an operation with that much payload, as much as 4 people. So while I think the industry is very excited that battery technology has matured to a point that it's now aviation grade ready, we still need to take a lot of battery weight, and any calculation that any operator makes with regards to how much energy do I take versus how many passengers do I take is a tough one. And so that's why I think, at least in the short term, for the scale that I think everyone is looking forward to offering, so maximizing as many passengers that can get on these aircraft as possible, the R44 is probably just too small of an airframe for broader commercial operations. That being said, it is a great platform in the conventional technology sense. I have flown on R44s on the VOOM urban air mobility platform when it was operational in Sao Paulo. Sometimes I flew a Bell Jet Ranger, other times it was an R44, and it's great. But just the electric version, I think, takes too much weight.
Remy, your thoughts?
Okay, so on the global component, or just the A44?
Well, just your thoughts. Why would you create something new from scratch, or why couldn't you electrify an existing airframe? Do you know if EHang even considered that approach, or were they more intent on developing their own bespoke technology?
Yeah, we created from scratch. We have to restart from zero, and that's there's 2 ways actually. The story of our founder, Huajo also know to pilot plane and a helicopter and so on, and his instructor died in a helicopter crash. So he wanted to forget about the mono rotors and go multi rotors. because we are talking of safety and multi-rotors, there will be redundancy in every arm. For example, our machine, which is 16 rotors, but 8 different arms. You have different redundancy and battery management in every arm of it. So if you have several propellers stopping, the race will compensate for safe landing. That's the first thing. Then when you design that kind of machine and when you want to do something very innovative, you got to start from scratch. There is 2 ways, and we can see it in Europe. I'm obviously French, so I can give you example of Airbus, for instance. You have those very dynamic companies, like all those small companies and startup, which is thinking a different way. So they use the latest components, they use the latest microprocessors, they use everything latest in terms of technology to make something happen. And the way we're able to carry 2 passengers more than 30 minutes full electrics is because our machine is extremely high tech with non-conventional aerospace material. Now you got some very conventional companies which is checking what has been working in airplane industry and commercial planes for 20 years, and they check some components which is not able to follow up battery management, which is not able to follow up all the propeller management, and it's just so obsolete. It's super late, super not modern. So you can't dream, you can't make something new out of old material. And that's why even very big companies are able to fly 50 seconds, or they're able to fly 5 minutes with a petrol engine, but they're not able to really invent something new, because they go based from what has been accepted already by certification. They think it's easier to check every component already have billion hours made, accepted by certification, and if they compose all those components together, they believe this machine may be flyable quicker because it can be certified quicker because the component is certified. But if you want to make something very innovative, you can't think this way. You need to take what is on the top of the market and try to make a new machine, and then you try to validate the global package of the machine. Of course, you can change one thing or two. You can add a local geocaching software. You can have maybe a pyrotechnic parachute and something to fit the requirement. But if we just work with all components, we cannot invent something new. It's not possible. We have to find the latest technology in terms of robotics, in terms of AI, in terms of components, in terms of composites, in order to create something which has not been created yet. And I think that's the key of EHAM.
Yeah, I think that actually plays into Kohi Nakamura's question about the certification across multiple different jurisdictions, which really makes it interesting. And of course, with the UK leaving EASA, there's great opportunities to accelerate what the UK is doing and what we could do. But I would imagine yourselves as manufacturers in the space would have to think about, well, do we want to do something in the UK? Yes, we can do it early, but is it going to delay us in getting acceptance in other markets? So that's a very interesting thing that we're dealing with, and possibly something that you guys could help Frederick in the regulatory sandbox that the CAA is building. I wanted to come back to Dan, and I hear a lot in the UK, and we heard from Gary Cutts earlier about UKRI and the Future Flight Challenge. Do you think that that the British government is doing enough to support investments in technologies in the UK, or are we stymied by a little bit more of a challenging investment environment? Because we see that in the US market, there's a lot more cash available for startups to be able to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think before COVID hit us, we could say that the UK government's approach was really welcoming, and the investment into future flight and the approach that they're taking there has been really helpful. Bringing together all the partners has been, again, really helpful, and we're delighted to be part of 5 consortium. In terms of the wider picture now, and I think Gary said it himself, it's what's going to happen in terms of this investment or support from a central government body. I don't know, but I'm hopeful that they will continue to support this and see it as not a replacement to traditional aerospace, but definitely an area that needs to continue to receive stimulation to be able to help us grow ourselves out of whatever depression or recession or whatever you want to call it, we're going to have to generate revenues, and what better way than to invest in innovation. In terms of more conventional investment appetite, we've seen an impact of the coronavirus is that traditional individual investment activities completely dried up. We've been obviously very grateful for the government support on the furloughing and of the bounce back loans and all the other stuff that a company of our size can benefit from. But yeah, when you're sitting on a couple of $100,000 up to 10, 20 million and deciding where you want to invest it as an individual, or perhaps through your family wealth office, then you can have a look at the FTSE index at the moment, look at fabulous, I guess, opportunities there that have significantly devalued, but they're going to survive this. So that's what we're up against in terms of the investment decisions that they're making. Ironically, we have seen a considerable surge of interest from overseas larger funds. And I think our interpretation of this, and it may not be true across the board, is that a lot of these funds were targeting investment in revenue generating opportunities. So it's a bit like the comments earlier where these VC and private equity firms are specifically looking for where people have already got through the early adoption, they're already established themselves, and they're on a more secure bet. So where the life cycle of that investment is coming through, traditionally it's more, I guess, further down the line. But now we're seeing they are coming back up towards innovators like ourselves, which are, I guess, we are where we are. So that's been great. It could be also to do with exchange rates and just all sorts of stuff like that. Or it could be that people have got sight of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it, and it is specific to us. And you know, I can't say at the moment, but it's looking really positive. And again, really grateful for the UK's, I guess, shepherding of quite a disparate range of things that need to come together. So safety, infrastructure, regulations, social acceptance, standards, security, whether we're going piloted, optionally piloted, remotely piloted, autonomous, all of these system-wide questions are now being aggressively answered now within the Future Flight Consortium, and that's great to see.
Brilliant. Okay, we're running up to our lunch break, and we've got a bit of a treat in store for everybody. In that earlier, I think it was late last month or early this month, David, myself with Neil Cluffley, we recorded a bit of a session. So that's going to be actually playing over the lunch break. But what I would like to do is invite my speakers to give their last minute thoughts on the industry, anything that they're desperate to share. So again, we'll go in the order of David, Remy, Dan, and then wrapping up with Caden. So David.
Thanks, Daryl. So first, thank you everyone for dialing in today and joining the conference. It's always exciting to see organizations like Foresight Aerospace grow and attract more interest in these types of conversations. So one thing that I'd like to ask everyone, and I believe I mentioned this when I was speaking to this audience the last time I was in London when we met at the 3 Cloth Street venue, and that was to please bring this conversation home to those that may not be as familiar with this subject matter. The more that we can do as industry partners to educate those that are less familiar with the subject matter, the better. I think in this pre-competitive stage when we're all gearing up for this industry to really scale, the best thing we can do is bring people into the fold so that they can make valuable contributions and want to partner as opposed to opposing things. Aviation tends to have this really interesting effect on people where they either are really excited and they want to buy into it, or it creates a lot of confusion and therefore people wanting to be contrarian to the evolution of aviation. And the more we can help people understand the value of what urban air mobility seeks to bring, I think the more people want to partner with it. And then it will be easier to create solutions that are truly in the interest of the masses. And so that's one request that I would have of everyone, is just share with as many people as you can what we're talking about today. So in conclusion, EmbraerX is very much dedicated to being a complete ecosystem partner to this industry. We're of course building an eVTOL. I'm leading our air traffic management initiative called Urban Air Traffic Management. We wrote a white paper about it, so if you want to visit our website, you can download it. As I mentioned earlier, we're currently collaborating with 2 air navigation service providers and evaluating new markets, new early adopters that want to learn how to take their next steps towards becoming an early adopter of this next generation of urban air mobility. And so EmberX very much believes in taking a procedures-based approach. We're not advocating for one type of a technology over another. But I do want to say one last thing, and that is, at least in the United States, the current federal aviation regulations in the FAR AIM has a very important section that perhaps is better well known to Caden and myself as commercial pilots, but it's section 91.3 subpart A, which essentially states that the pilot in command has the sole responsibility of the flight. And if anything should happen to that flight, it's the pilot's discretion to figure out what to do in an emergency. And as we think about the types of procedures and technologies that enable this industry to grow, we can't forget that the pilot in command really has the authority and the responsibility to ensure a safe flight. And so while EmberX is fully committed to building an autonomous ready aircraft, we ought not to rush towards autonomy if the data and the safety use case is not yet there. I think that everyone is interested in making sure that this can be rolled out safely. And as we do that, I just want to caution that we not jump towards conclusions about the types of technologies that we can use to enable this without making sure that they're tested. And I think that ultimately boils down to what type of data-driven recommendations can we then give our legislators, who can then create law that will enable the regulator to regulate this type of a future semi-autonomous and then eventually fully autonomous environment, which is in all of the manufacturer's best interest, so that we can really create an operation that can scale. So just a few things to think about. And once again, thank you to everyone on the panel. Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you. Remy, your last thoughts, please.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Daryl, and thank you for Foresight Aerospace 2020. It was very interesting. And as I said, it's always interesting to exchange with other company, and because we're all doing the same, we all have the same dream and the same fight, and in terms of also all the certification, and I'm very eager to see our machine fly everywhere tomorrow. We're all at this point. So I think it's interesting to communicate together, because we're all colleagues actually. And that's it. After the promise of EHang, EHang is the future is now, is to continue to develop as quick as possible. We have always very long week, very long days. We work nearly seven, and we are developing quickly, and we want to go everywhere. We're a small company, 300 people, but already in NASDAQ, so we're not a company outside of nowhere. We are recognized for the 120 patents that we got now in our machine, was been invented by EHang, and we want to keep develop this way. Very high standing machine, and something to fly very soon, that we can see our machine fly very soon in Europe, in UK, and in US. And about UK, there's something very interesting. Is actually we, as the rest of Europe, we're a little bit scared after the Brexit to see UK get more traditional, and close themselves a little bit to the rest of Europe, or to the rest of all the modernity that we're doing now. And actually it's not. We have very excellent meetings with many British companies, and it's exactly the other way. And we can see the relationship possible maybe with the CAA. It's even easier than the rest of the world. Yeah, because it's really good. It's a UK of tomorrow will be even more modern. So that's a really good thing. It's good for you also, Dan. and it's a great country to develop. And I would be happy to talk to all of you also independently. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Dan.
Yeah, well, we're still going. We're still making progress, and we're extremely grateful, as Remy's saying there, to be in the UK for all of the reasons he's laid out there. We're looking forward to resuming our prototype testing, as the airfield's been closed for the last 2 months. In the meantime, we've been focused on some strategic important stuff, such as patenting, documentation, going through our certification plans, reviewing all the components and the designs and so forth. So that's been a very productive period for the last 2 months. And yeah, we are very excited to be on the cusp of announcing some significant material news that should come out in the next 6 to 8 weeks, which will hopefully see us in a much stronger position and able to really cement our place in the company that I find myself in today. And I'm humbled by it. It's great to see this whole community come together and really work together on trying to get this new mode of transport out there as quickly as possible.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Caden, sir, last word. You need done?
Okay, yep, there we go. Thank you, Daryl. Again, I want to thank you and thank everybody that's participated, both as a speaker and as an attendee. This has been a wonderful, very educational and informative. So I want to since I'm the last one, I want to come down the line. I see that Dan's still with us. Dan made some very good comments about the financial market, which is very important to understand. I had alluded to issues such as, the VCs, private equity. Dan, one thing you might find interesting, as well as others, we actually did our raise right smack in the middle of COVID. We did a short offering of 7 weeks. And it worked out extremely well. So there's a lot of interesting market dynamics that are going on up and down with COVID and how it's affecting the various markets. We'd like to follow up with you one day on that and anybody that's interested. But, there's a few things that really are coming out of this that we haven't talked about. One of it is when we talk about autonomy and we look at the wonderful things that Remy and EHang are doing, and the world is watching EHang, and Embraer's a major large cabin player. They're a manufacturer, so they have a lot of skill sets and resources to play in this space, and they're focusing heavily on the air traffic management. But one of the things that we've also been looking heavily at is cargo. And there's a lot of reasons why we look at cargo, because one, it's a different certification process, same aircraft, but different utilization. The airspace utilization is different. And we are partnered with an organization that is moving hundreds of millions of pounds of freight monthly across North America and into Africa. And there's different mission requirements for the cargo. But one of the things that cargo does is it allows us to transition into autonomy faster than in a piloted airplane carrying passengers. And some of the studies that we have done in conjunction with Georgia Institute of Technology and other universities and research and development centers is we estimate that there's at least 10 million flight hours required to come up with deterministic solutions for autonomous systems. Getting that with passenger aircraft are going to be very difficult. And when we also have to look at the growth of the aircraft. If you're looking at factory of the future 4.0 manufacturing capabilities, we have, like I mentioned, Triumph on structures. This is what they do. And even still for each facility implementation, we're probably limited to about 2,500 aircraft per year, which means we'd have to build additional factories, the capital cost associated with these factories to start cranking out lots of aircraft. So, before you start seeing 30, 40, 50,000 aircraft in the air, or even 2,000 aircraft operating in one metroplex, it's going to take time to get there. That's going to allow time to develop the air traffic management systems, the airspace systems, breed familiarity and safety, comfort with passengers, but also to develop the cargo, where we could implement cargo and start exploring autonomous operations much faster than we could with passenger travel. So again, there's a lot that's going on in the industry right now. I think the main theme that everybody says, share the information, and we need to do that. This is bigger than all of us. The market can support all of us, or at least many, many players in this space, particularly in niche markets. It used to be, Boeing, if they could build 1,000 airliners over 20 years, that was looking great. You look at general aviation aircraft, if they could crank out 100 aircraft, 200 aircraft a year, that would be great. Now we're talking about cranking out 200 aircraft a month in one facility. So again, the market is there, the opportunities are there, I think we all collectively need to share the information like everybody's been saying, but also we need to look at holistically the big picture, because without the big picture, everything's intertwined. I don't think we can go down a silo and say, we're just going to go down this one silo. It may work in a niche market, but the cost to develop, to certify, to put infrastructure, and to only be able to hit a niche market may not economically be there, and may not please, as Dan would say, the VCs and the private equity firms that are looking for those high rates of return. So anyway, thank you to everybody. Thank you, Daryl. This has been wonderful. And thanks for everybody attending and listening in.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Caden, Dan, Remy, and David. Absolutely fantastic panel session. We're now going to break for lunch. We're about 15 minutes late, but we're still going to aim for a 2 o'clock start. And Eric is going to play the webinar that we pre-recorded a little while ago on impact of COVID-19 on electric aviation, and a conversation I had with David and Neil. So take it away, Eric. Thank you very much, folks. We'll see you at 2 o'clock.